They called it a milk churn with wings, a chrome bathtub, a flying anvil, the Jug. When Lieutenant Danny Cole first saw the Republic P-47D parked on a muddy English dispersal in spring '43, he laughed out loud like everyone else. The belly looked swollen enough to hide a piano. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp up front was a cast-iron grin of cylinders. The four-blade prop seemed comically oversized. Next to a sleek Spitfire, the Jug looked like a farmhand at a ballroom. "Don't worry," the crew chief said, patting the fuselage like a draft horse. "She ain't pretty. She's mean." Mean? Danny wasn't sure. He had read the squadron gossip. The Thunderbolt climbed like a church on Sunday and drank fuel like a battleship. At altitude, it could be sluggish. The 56 Fighter Group's old hands joked that if you pointed its nose straight down and waited, it would eventually accelerate out of insult and into legend. But nobody had seen legend yet. Not with the Luftwaffe still laughing. First escort to the Ruhr. Cold air bit through leather and wool as the bombers droned east in ragged boxes, contrails braiding overhead. The Jugs waddled along higher, heavy with external tanks, radio chatter full of rookie bravado. Then the bandits showed, dirty yellow-nosed Focke-Wulfs slashing in from sun angles, BF-109s corkscrewing down the contrails. Danny tensed as the first swarm carved across the formation, cannon shells bursting like black peonies around a B-17. He shoved the throttle forward, and the entire airplane heaved. Not sprightly, not deaf, but implacable like someone moving furniture with bad intentions. 2 o'clock high, his element leader barked. "Keep your speed." That became the Jug's first lesson. Speed is armor. The R-2800's two-stage supercharger wound up with a sound like a vault door opening, and the P-47 started to run. It didn't dart, it built. The 109 pilot who banked to meet Danny expected an easy overshoot. Instead, he got 8 synchronized .50s, 400 rounds per second, stitched clean across his wing root. The Messerschmitt flared white and then was gone, a tumble of fragments sparkling through cloud. Holy, Danny never finished. A 190 had slipped below, popping up through the bomber stream, cannons hammering. Instinct said turn, but the Jug didn't promise salvation in a turn. It promised something else. "Dive, Jug! Dive!" the radio screamed. He rolled inverted and fell. The nose bit the vertical, and the Thunderbolt's mass, so much mocked mass, became a weapon. Speed piled on, faster, faster. The needles jittered. The airframe growled but held. The 190 tried to follow and learned a lesson they would learn all year. A Jug in a dive was a falling cathedral. It went where gravity itself wanted to go, only with 1,000 extra horses hurling the pews. The Focke-Wulf's wings began to snatch and tremble. The German pilot abandoned the chase, rolling away into a safer sky. Danny bottomed out over a patchwork of fields, pulled a wide, steady arc, and climbed again, slowly, yes, but climbing still, the big turbocharger gnawing oxygen into horsepower. Back over the bombers, the laughter was gone from the Luftwaffe's radio. The first Thunderbolts had blooded them. Not genius, not grace, just volume. The Jug did not cut, it clubbed. And war, Danny realized, didn't give points for posture. That night, a mechanic named Fitch showed him the belly armor plate and the intricate maze of the turbo supercharger ducting. "People think she's fat," Fitch said. "She's packed. Oil coolers, intercoolers, oxygen bottles, more electrics than a city bus. You know what it means? It means if somebody knocks, there's somewhere for the bullet to go that ain't you." The Luftwaffe kept laughing in bars. They mailed sketches home, mocking the American flying oil tank. But the mockery hit a worry nobody dared toast. The Jug was changing the math. It could drag a bomber formation farther, higher. It could dive from 30,000 like a guillotine and come back out with its wings still attached. And when the fight dropped low over a rail yard or hedgerow, it could soak punishment like a barroom stove. The next month, Danny learned the second lesson. The Thunderbolt did not fear homecomings. Flak over a marshalling yard south of Antwerp treated the sky like a foundry, roaring furnaces of shrapnel. His wingman took a hit that chewed the rudder into lace and blew a hole in the starboard wing big enough to crawl through. The Jug kept flying. Gear wouldn't lock. Fine. He bellied in across an English pasture, climbing out of a cratered fuselage with a grin full of mud. The crew counted the holes. 83. Still laughing. Fitch muttered to nobody. By late 43, the 56th, Zemke's wolf pack, was riding a manual in smoke and brass. Don't turn with 109s if you can help it. Don't try to outclimb a fresh G model with the sun behind it. But control the fight's altitude, set the rules, and the Jug plays judge and jury. Take your altitude dividend, convert it to speed with a dive, make one clean pass, and then extend, climb back on the turbo, reset. Not pretty, not gentlemanly. Terminal. The Luftwaffe adapted. They attacked the bombers in head-on passes where escorts found it hard to intercept. They hid in the bomber stream and popped up through contrails like sharks in spilled milk. They taught their rookies to avoid following Thunderbolts downhill. They also started hearing a new noise, a howl that signaled American fighters were finally ranging deep. The P-47's range, an early Achilles heel, was growing with bigger tanks, better fuel planning, and a pilot culture that treated every gallon like a lifeline. Suddenly, the Jugs weren't just over the coast. They were over Germany. Somewhere near Bremen, Danny's flight chased a pair of 190s between smokestacks. The Germans split. Danny followed the leader down a valley river. At 400 knots, the Jug felt like a skipping stone that refused to sink. The 190 jinked hard left, then right. On the third jink, Danny didn't follow. He anticipated and let the mass and inertia carry him through a shallow lead. The Pipper crossed the Focke-Wulf's canopy. He tapped the trigger. The .50s spoke in a braided scream. Plexiglass powdered into mist. The German pilot slumped. The Jug bored through his wake and climbed for home. The laughing had stopped. But the true humiliation, the one the Luftwaffe would spend long nights trying to drink away, wasn't in the blue above Germany. It was lower, dirtier, inevitable. It began the day the Thunderbolt learned to hate trains. The briefing was simple. Skip the elegant duels. Hunt rail hubs, locomotives, bridges, kill movement. Thunderbolts went overhead at noon, at dusk, at times of rumor and mealtime. 850s walked their way down a line of boxcars and set a nation on fire in perfectly spaced half-second signatures. When fuel tanks blew, the Jug simply rolled and came again. If Flat got lucky, the Jug got lower. If a 190 showed up, every Jug in the county climbed like winter onto a window and came down on him like weather. Who's laughing now? Someone wrote in grease pencil on a bomb truck. By the time winter came, the Jug had a new reputation with German ground crews, the last sound of the day. At a field near Cambrai, a Luftwaffe mechanic swore he could always tell a Thunderbolt's dive by the way dogs hid under trucks half a minute before the sirens. You couldn't outrun a meteor. You could only pray it chose another town. One gray afternoon, Danny landed with both main tires shredded, aileron cables nicked, and an oil temperature gauge cooked halfway into the red. He shut down to the applause of the ground crew and stared across the dispersal at a row of Thunderbolts sitting like loyal bulldogs, muddy, dented, still breathing. Ugly, ain't they? Fitch said, following his gaze. Ugly like a hammer, Danny said. And I figured out something. What's that? The point of a hammer isn't to look good in your hand. Fitch laughed then, not like a man mocking, but like one who'd bet on the right kind of ugly. To be continued. Part 2, when the anvil learned to fly. By spring 44, the joke in the 8th Air Force ready rooms was simple. If you were stupid enough to bring a train schedule to work, a Jug would read it over your shoulder. After Big Week and the bloodbath over Berlin, the Luftwaffe's fighter arm had bled experienced leaders. The kids replacing them were brave and doomed. The Thunderbolt was not the best turner, not the longest-legged, not the prettiest. It was simply the most survivable battering ram ever to wear a star, and now it had found its purpose. D-Day was coming. That gave the Jug a new verb, interdict. The instructors boiled it down, cut the arteries, shocked the heart. Bridges into Normandy? Break them. Columns under hedgerows? Rake them. Radar vans? Blind them. If the Luftwaffe rose, kill it. If it hid, hit its fuel. If fuel hid, hit the trains that brought it. And when the army asked for help on a radio net, crackling with fear, show up. The Jug's laugh became a growl that Allied infantry would learn to love. Danny's group moved to a strip closer to the coast. Pierced steel planking, tents that leaked, tea that tasted of shoreline. They hung 500-pounders under the big wings and stubby bazookas near the wingtips. The R-2800 didn't care. It had 2,500 horses and a chip on its shoulder. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin, threw in what it had, 109 GS, 190 as occasional doors that could run with anything low down. For a while, the Germans still tried to pick fights on their terms. A Jug in a turning knife fight was a barge in a ballet. But Danny's squadron didn't bring knives. They brought gravity. On a training day before the invasion, an instructor from the 56th visited and gave a sermon Danny would never forget. Boys, the Thunderbolt is a flying strategy. You will make E, trade E, keep E. You will live and kill by energy. You will not dogfight. If a Hun turns with you, that's because he's already out of ideas. Use the vertical. Your airplane is a chimney with bullets. The chimney roared on June 6th. Thunderbolts were everywhere, beachhead, causeways, crossroads, and the Luftwaffe wasn't. The once cocky adversary could hardly get 10 sorties over the beaches without running into a dozen Jugs happy to split S and introduce them to terminal velocity. Ground fire was the threat now, harder to predict than a pilot, more stubborn than pride. It found Danny on the third day. A column of trucks choked a lane behind the front, and his flight rolled in pairs. The flak stitched up, a sewing machine of death. He loosed at 300 yards, bombs leaping away like intentions fulfilled, and then wham, a blow under the left wing that rang the airframe like a gong. Alarms. Oil smear. The Jug didn't jink. It set its jaw. Danny dragged it home on one magneto and spite. He landed long, tires screaming, and slewed into the grass. Crew chiefs ran, medics ran. He popped the canopy to the smell of hot oil and burned luck. "Can you fix her?" he asked Fitch. Fitch wiped his hands. "Son, we could fix a church bell on this thing." They did. They riveted and prayed and safety wired. 2 days later it flew. The Luftwaffe's laugh had curdled into something else entirely. Incredulity. How did they keep coming? Because Republic had built a philosophy in aluminum. Redundancy, mass depth. Because the R-2800 could run hurt longer than most engines could run healthy. Because the turbo gave sea-level horses to sky-high fights. Because 850s aimed once, ended arguments. Now the ground called constantly. Jabos, Jabos, the German nickname for fighter bombers, crackled on Allied intercepts as panic columns asked for rescue that wasn't coming. Danny's squadron learned to smell ambush. A line of trucks parked too tidy, flat gun in the bushes. A locomotive idling by cops, flat gun in the tender. The Jug gave no quarter to deceit. It would strafe, break, climb a patient spiral to 8,000, roll over and fall again. Each pass was a page in a manual the Luftwaffe had not been issued. In late summer, escort duty returned as bombers ranged oil. Over Merseburg, the sky looked like a factory of smoke. 109s tried diving attacks. 190s tried head-ons. The Jugs, now with paddle blade props and better high-altitude manners, learned to catch them earlier. Danny cornered a Dora that thought it could run and watched it flee into the weave of contrails like a gray needle. He didn't chase, he set up. Gravity, patience, a long, shallow dive, a quiet cross. When the Dora committed to a climb, he pressed. A 3-second burst unstitched the tail. The German bunted and bailed. Danny flew through a cloud of silver that looked like confetti until he realized it was shrapnelized metal and somebody's map. By autumn, German pilots had a new superstition. If a Thunderbolt appeared above you, look for another. They hunted in pairs, one high, one low, a hammer, an anvil that could trade parts on a nod. Ground controllers screamed bearings that no longer produced relief. Fuel was tight, experience tighter. The Jug was a system now. Fighter command, repaired depots, petrol trucks, weathermen, the invisible economy of a nation in total war. all expressing themselves in one blunt sentence that roared on a constant note. We will be here, and you will not like it. Winter brought the Ardennes and a last cruel gamble. The Luftwaffe laughed again, just once, on New Year's morning, Bodenplatte, their surprise attack on Allied fields. It worked for a day, smashing rows of parked airplanes. Then the bill arrived. The Thunderbolts that survived, and the fresh ones ferried in by a logistics chain the Germans could not bomb to death, lifted into a sky that cleared like a conscience. Over road after road in Belgium, the Jug began to write the conclusion in kerosene and tracer. Ask any German tanker what he feared, and he'd say rockets or typhoons. Ask any German trucker, any dispatch rider, any field cook, and he'd say the roar. The Thunderbolt's dive was a sound Allied infantry learned to cheer, and German columns learned to count. 8 guns, 50 caliber, their pattern like a zipper tearing Europe open along its seams. Strafing runs didn't care if an ace was hiding in the ditch. They didn't care what metals you'd pinned to a tunic. They cared whether steel met gasoline. Danny's last great fight came on a day of scattered cloud and bad information. A freight yard beyond the Rhine, heavily defended. The flight went in low, hedge-hopping, flacked blue blossoms of black in all the wrong places. He pickled on a line of tank cars, pulled, and felt a slam that shoved his teeth together. The canopy spiderwebbed. Instruments jittered like frightened mice. "Smoke," he said. "I'm hit. Climb if you can," his element leader answered. He tried. The R-2800 coughed again. The Jug refused to die dramatically. It preferred stubbornness. He cleared the yard, eased the nose down, and nursed 170 knots toward lines that were a rumor beyond the haze. A 109 slashed out of cloud, saw the limping whale, and tasted an easy kill. He bored in, cannon puffs bracketed the Jug, and then tracers from nowhere. Danny's wingman had dived out of the sun the old-fashioned way, his own 850s walking up the 109's back like a sermon. The Messerschmitt wheeled away, trailing black. "Still got you," his wingman said, voice almost casual. "Keep that barge lined up." They made it back. Fitch counted holes until he ran out of jokes. "Son," he said finally, "this ain't an airplane. This is a decision." The war ran downhill from there. Bridges fell faster than engineers could replace them. The Luftwaffe threw green pilots into sawmills disguised as cockpits. A few aces remained, wounded lions, dangerous up close, but the sky belonged to a machine that had been designed by a pugilist. The Jug finished what it had started, an industrialized mercy. In it quicker, in it certain, in it with as few funerals as possible among the boys who needed to go home and grow old. Years later, in a museum where children press faces to glass, Danny stood in front of Thunderbolt and tried to explain. The docent talked about horsepower and turbochargers, wing loading and dive limits. The kids nodded like tourists at a cathedral who had never felt the echo. He waited until the crowd shuffled on, then put his hand on the metal. It was cold and faintly oily like memory. "They laughed at you," he told the airplane, as if it could hear. "I did too." He thought of the first day, the first dive, the shape a contrail makes when it breaks into fear. He thought of trains that never reached the front, of boys in wool whose last sight was a black-mouthed propeller and a red-rimmed cowl, of ground crews who slept under wings because tents leaked, of a mechanic who believed in church bells and safety wire, of a sound on winter mornings that meant the day might end with a hot meal instead of a letter. And then you annihilated them, he finished softly, not with hate, not with glee, but with the weary gratitude of someone who had seen what failing to annihilate looks like. A kid wandered back, tugging his sleeve. "Mister," the kid asked, "how could something so big beat the fast ones?" Danny smiled. "Because war isn't a race," he said. "It's a task." And this, he tapped the Jug's thick flank, was the right tool. Outside the museum, the wind picked up, and for an instant he heard it, a distant howl that might have been weather and might have been history, a sound of weight falling through air toward a point of decision. The Thunderbolt had taught him that some laughs are cheap and some answers are heavy. It had carried the heavy ones again and again until there were no questions left.